MTG Jedi buys Raid. What? Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and it looks like Raid has been sold. Aristocrat, the owner of Plarium, has sold it to Modern Times Group, or MTG. So, no, MTG Jedi has not purchased Raid Shadow Legends. Kind of a cool article, but so what does this mean? Well, immediately I can tell you right now, this means absolutely nothing because this has got to go through, all the money's got to get transferred, and for the most part, Raid is probably going to stay the course. So from a development standpoint, there's not going to be much change, but what is it going to mean for us, the players? What is it going to mean for the long-term health? And really what's going on? So Aristocrat is a gambling focused company based out of Australia. They are the largest software gambling company in the world, I believe. And I've actually done a little bit of work with them through one of my jobs, and it was not very pleasant. They are very financially focused, they are very much bottom line focused. And in some ways, that shone through in what Raid did. The real question is, Gus, going to be is how much is that going to affect Raid going forward? But we'll kind of get into that later. But basically, Raid has been sold for $620 million that could go up to $820 million. And it's the entire Plarium development. It is not just Raid, the Raid IP. So that also means some of the Viking games that Plarium has developed, as well as Mech Arena, which is actually doing fairly well for Plarium. It's not a big money maker compared to Raid, but it's still pulling in millions of dollars a year. So it's doing well enough. And they're being sold to MTG. MTG is a games development firm. They are based out of Sweden, and they actually have a number of other studios. I believe they have 5 other studios. They have worked on, there's a couple of mobile games, not mobile games I was very familiar with, but some of them I've seen the style of beforehand. There's a Warhammer game that I think one of the companies there's a couple of puzzles games, some of the other ones, and it fits very well into the portfolio of a mobile game developer. So, and in fact here, if you actually go to their website here, and maybe I'll link this down below, but you can actually read what MTG says about why they purchased Raid and what their plans are with it and how it fits into their overall strategy, which I think is good. I think it's actually good that some of the stuff is actually fairly transparent, fairly open, and they can actually say why they want it. Whereas Aristocrat apparently is more interested in focusing more on the gambling side and doing away with their software development outside of the gambling space, which is fine. They're consolidating. It's a thing companies do. Basically, in waves, you get companies that kind of diversify and then they consolidate. It's actually pretty regular. So I mentioned, first of all, some of my experience with Aristocrat. Aristocrat is very bottom line focused. As a gambling company, they are definitely about profit over a lot of other things because you kind of have to be in a gambling situation. Was that affecting Plarium? Probably to some extent. There's definitely a lot of gambling mechanics in Raid. I know I've talked about it beforehand. There's a lot of gambling mechanics in gacha games in general, but Raid very specifically has a gambling mentality of being stingy with what you get, to where when you get something good, it kind of hooks you in and it makes you feel better and you want to get that next best thing. And that's kind of where a lot of the RNG based games, the loot games, the games where you're farming stuff, the games where you're pulling champions, all of that stuff, that is kind of where those type of games focus. And it fit very well for Aristocrat. Now, Aristocrat owned Plarium before they developed Raid, so they probably had some level of input in Raid. And obviously, I think some of the gambling aspects of Plarium's Raid are based off of information that Aristocrat had as well. But does that mean that Plarium, being a super money-focused company, was all Aristocrat? I don't know. And here's there's two good sides of this. Let's go into the good first. The possible good that could happen from this. As Modern Times Group is a developer of multiple games that appear to have been somewhat successful, they know how to make a successful game and they know how to keep a game successful. So this will fit right in. Plarium clearly knows how to make Raid successful. And despite the fact that it feels like lately they've been shooting themselves in the foot, they generally know how to keep a game somewhat successful because you don't have 5 years of Raid the way that they have had 5 years of Raid and not be a good game that attracts people to it. So Plarium has done a good job of making a game that's run for 5 years. Hopefully will run for quite a long time to come. At least I'm still enjoying it. And Modern Times may allow them to focus a little less on the immediate bottom line and a little more on retaining players. And in fact, I suspect in the short term, Plarium is probably going to do things to try to make sure that players don't feel like they're being abandoned because they've been transferred in ownership. I've played other games that have transferred in ownership beforehand, and quite often studios that get these transfers in ownership about who changes will make sure that they do something to assure the players that they're not going anywhere and that players don't need to dive because the quality is not going to go down immediately. And what that means, I don't know. It may just be a statement. It may be Plarium offering some special packs. It may be them running a cool event. It might just be them doing business as usual because they do have a big content drop coming sometime in the next month or two. The good news is that if Aristocrat was so focused on the bottom line that they were squeezing Plarium for all it's worth, and Plarium can edge out a little bit of that mentality, we may get some quality of life improvements out of Raid. We may get some price changes in Raid. We may get all kinds of stuff that may make Raid a better game. That said, the other problem that you could have with this is you could also, on the other end, have MTG looking at this as this can be our new cash cow, and we need this to help fund some of the other stuff we want to do. And as a result, Plarium may not change at all, or may even get stingier as the company tries to squeeze every amount of profit they can out of this type of investment. I lean towards, at least in the immediate future, we will have some outreach to people to assure them that the game is not going anywhere. But I do understand that MTG is probably looking to make money off of this deal. However, this might be a company that understands that making money in the long term doesn't always mean squeezing it in the short term. And that's really, I think, where Aristocrat, I think, may have hurt Plarium. The gambling mentality is squeeze as much out of you can out of people as much as possible. It really is. And Plarium definitely tries to do that. And if they ease up on that just a little bit, I think that will help. The other thing I think that's going to kick Raid and Plarium into being a little more player focused is we do have Godforge coming up. We have King Arthur Legend Rise that has just been released. You've got a couple of interesting gacha games that play in a similar space that should start to put pressure on Raid to be a better game if they want to keep players. I'm not a financial expert. I've worked in the financial industry. I worked mostly in IT, however, so I'm not really in the space. I'm not super knowledgeable in the space, but I would like to think that this gives Plarium some hope to maybe focus just a little bit more on listening to players. And this might also explain some of their crunching and stretching and changes they have made that seem to be squeezing players out. And this may give them a chance to kind of pull back a little bit, listen to players, and say, look, now that we're under new management, we're listening to you, and they can even roll back some changes and try to make it a good PR move. And as far as long term is concerned, we'll see how the long term goes. There's a lot of things Raid could do to squeeze more money out of players. There's a lot of things Raid could do to improve its player base. There's a lot of things Raid could do to make it a long-term successful game and a long-term successful moneymaker. Hopefully, this particular way of operating will help them move forward. because I think if you're watching this video, there's a good chance you care about Raid and you want Raid to succeed, and that's what we really need to hope. Until then, just keep playing Raid. Don't let this affect what you're doing too much. Don't let this scare you one way or the other. We'll just kind of have to see as we go down the road and the future of Raid together. So until the next video, I'm Bront CatHerder.